So, as already mentioned, my name is Lorna Howlett. I'm representing the Coral Nurture Program today and the University of Technology, Sydney. And today I'm going to be talking about how our researcher and stakeholder partnerships have helped us to aid and improve restoration on the Great Barrier Reef, and hopefully share some lessons that we've learned to help anyone else looking to cross-collaborate across sectors. So firstly, I'd like to acknowledge and extend my respects to the traditional custodians of the land and sea country on which the Coral Nurture Program operates throughout North and Central Queensland, and also Gadigal country, which is where UTS sits in Sydney. So briefly skip over this. We already know that reef resilience is threatened by climate change, but this has been acknowledged in key peer-reviewed publications, but also recent government publications as well, and outlining that we need to test and deploy methods for reef restoration as part of adapting new approaches to better manage our reefs. And I'm sure throughout the symposium and already we've heard some amazing work that's currently being done on the Great Barrier Reef around reef restoration efforts, ranging from coral propagation, rubble stabilisation to the use of sexual reproduction of corals. But what these all have in common is they tend to be quite labour intensive. There's the added complications of accessing the sites. You need to have vessels to be able to get out there, and all of this combines to increase the cost of these methods. And excuse the pun with the icon there, I was running out of icons, but we are reducing scale of these as well. So this has led into the Coral Nurture Program. So it started off as a collaboration between researchers from the University of Technology, Sydney, and tourism operators based in Port Douglas in North Queensland. And this collaboration came about after the 2016-17 mass bleaching events, because the tourism operators had noticed a big decline in coral cover at their sites, and they were looking to increase that coral cover and provide a bit of ecological resilience, but also resilience of their business as well. So the aim was to integrate coral propagation practices into day-to-day tourism operations, because these guys are visiting the sites already every single day. So integrating that helped to reduce the cost and hopefully upscale, and then the research can help to further optimise those practices as well. So, oh no, I've gone too far. Hold on. So to be able to integrate into day-to-day tourism operations, it's really important to have rapidly deployable but also easily adaptable methods. And especially on tourism vessels where you've got passengers on board, you need to get around workplace health and safety constraints. So using chemical adhesives isn't going to work when you've got passengers all around. So that's why Coral Nurture Program co-founder John Edmondson developed what's called the Coral Clip. So that's here in the photo. It's a way of rapidly attaching fragments of coral to areas of coral rock. And to provide a source of fragments at these tourism sites, we installed coral nurseries, and as you can see, quite often they're made from repurposed materials, again to reduce the cost. So we started in 2018 on just one site, Opal Reef, with one tourism operator. This is our proof of concept phase. Once the corals were surviving really well, the coral was growing well on the nurseries, we expanded our collaborations to include 6 other tourism operators on a further 7 reefs between Cape Tribulation and Cairns. We're then lucky enough to collaborate with the Mars team and the Reef Authority and Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service in a joint restoration effort on Green Island. And following the success of that, we're invited to also help on Bait Reef in a very similar project, but on a much larger scale. And operating for the first time out of Airlie Beach, we're able to get in contact with 3 more tourism operators, which were also really keen to join the Coral Nurture Program. So we then set up a further 3 outplanting sites within the Whitsundays with the tourism operators there. So what we've been able to achieve since 2018 with this huge collaboration is over 105,000 outplanted corals on 30 different sites all throughout the northern and central reef. But also really important to note, especially with this map, you can see there's a big gap in the middle. We're clearly focusing on the economically important reefs, not necessarily the ecologically important ones. So that's obviously a gap that we would really like to fill in the future. So just to go into how these collaborations actually work when you're in the water. So using Bait Reef as an example, this was a site that was impacted by Cyclone Debbie. So what used to be coral bommies, which are really popular with recreational diving, became bare areas of coral rock surrounded by coral rubble. So this was a great example of how two different but complementary restoration methods can be used within the same site. The Mars team with their reef stars consolidated the rubble that was around the bommies, while the Coral Nurture Program team worked on the rocks all around the area as well. And of course, this wouldn't have been possible without the vessel access and the skill set and divers that came from the two tourism operators, Kiana and Redcat, and the Reef Authority and Queensland Parks and Wildlife Service staff and vessels. And it's just a nice pretty view of what the corals planted with the coral clip look like after a year and a half. So we're obviously still going back to the site and doing surveys to see how those are going. So going now, the last half of my presentation, into the lessons that we've learnt. Hopefully other people here can take these lessons home and adapt those to your own methods. We've found when you're doing any new collaboration, it's important to establish clear project goals from the offset. And this helps to develop trust between partners, but also helps to come up with a monitoring program for how you're going to determine whether these goals have been met. And also, even within just the tourism space, different goals resonate more with different tourism operators. So it's important to keep that in mind as well. So of course, with all the differences in business models and operator models, for example, are the tourism operators just visiting one site in a day or multiple sites? All these sorts of things all confound to impact the Coral Nurture Program model outcomes. So just because it works a certain way for one company in one area doesn't mean it's going to work the same elsewhere, and it's important to acknowledge that and understand that going forward. Sorry to throw graphs at you, but we found it was really important to track costings. This is a great piece of work done by Rachel Scott within Coral Nurture Program. She found that while we started off integrating into routine planting days or tourism days, which is in the orange, it yields a really low cost per coral, which is great. But that didn't work for all operators, and especially in the Whitsundays, they actually preferred to do what's called dedicated planting days in the dark blue, which is where they just took the boat out and purely planted with no passengers on board. And that often yielded a higher number of corals that were able to be put out per diver hour. But of course, to get a high number of corals planted per diver hour, you need to invest in training and allow time for the people doing the planting to get used to the methods and gain that experience. So important to include that in your budgeting as well. Sorry, more plots, but what this basically outlines is if you want to try and increase coral cover within a site to make ecological changes to the site, determining the success of those goals is going to take time. And that's an important thing to communicate to partners. It's not just plant it and leave it. You have to invest in the monitoring trips to go back and keep checking and doing the benthic surveys. So for example, out of the 6 sites that we've been surveying for 2 years where they've been doing planting, one of them showed a significant increase in coral cover. And of course, you're telling that to the tourism operators that have been working really hard at these sites, and they get a bit deflated thinking it hasn't done anything. But in actual fact, if you instead look at the average size of the corals, we're bridging that gap through planting, having more smaller sized corals within the outplanting site. So it's just simply taking time for the corals to grow big enough that you're going to be able to pick them up in the benthic surveys that we're doing. And we also have to make sure that the surveys are fit for purpose. So This is a really great example of an increase in coral cover due entirely to planting with the coral clip. But if we're, say, doing a line intercept transect, which is counting just the corals that go underneath that tape, we're missing all of the coral growth around that, and we're not really going to be picking up much of the changes that are happening there. So that's why we've been moving towards, for example, using 3D photogrammetry. Important for us, the monitoring efforts, if you've only got a set amount of time that the boat's there with passengers at a site, it's got to be quick and it's got to be easy. And we found photogrammetry is another method that is really good for that, but also captures, as you can see, a huge area. So this one's just a vessel grounding site which we planted the coral clips in. So key take-home messages from this one. Of course, as we all know, and why we're all in this room, we know reef stakeholder partnerships is what's key to increasing scalability of coral restoration in the short term. Need to establish clear project goals when you start a new collaboration. Good to have easily deployable and adaptable methods, especially if you're putting them on tourism vessels. Good to track costs. Everyone always asks when we start a new partnership, how much is it going to cost me, or us, or the funders? So you need to have that information ready. Understand that success can be variable, and that's okay, as long as there's a big network of people all learning off each other and we're not in competition, then that's all right. And long-term monitoring, remember, is a long-term commitment, and we need to communicate that effectively. So, thanks to all of our collaborators, it's a really great problem to have when you're struggling to fit all of the logos on one slide. So hopefully we'll keep adding more logos into the future. And thank you so much, everyone. I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Lorna. Are there any questions from the audience? I also don't know who my Slido moderator is for this session. Amazing. Thank you. Appreciate that. No?
I'm off the hook.
You just might be. Thank you, Lorna. Another round of applause.